All right, this is another one of our do the analysis with me assignments for Music 131. Trying to get you used to looking at music and thinking key, chord function, writing the chord symbols using Roman numerals, and figured bass when appropriate. And just get tips and tricks, sort of a how-to feeling for doing this. This is the Christmas Carol with Wandering Awe, using Christmas carols because most people know them or can find quick recordings of them. You should know how this goes before you do some of the analysis, because your ears and your intuition from the sound itself is the most important thing. But this is the one that goes, with wandering awe the wise men saw the star on heaven springing. And springing it, so if you don't know this, plunk it out or go online and find this and just listen to it a bit so you can get an idea of how it goes. Okay, so we start just with key. 1 sharp suggests to us that we're in the key of G major or E minor. Okay? If you don't know that, then you have to work on key signature and scale recognition. Notice that if we're in the key of G, we're going to find a lot of 1 and 5 chords, which would be a G chord or a D, maybe a D7. And if we're in E minor, you're going to see a lot of E minor chords and a B or a B7, right, for our 1 and 5 chords. And if you look here at the beginning, see that the beginnings and ends of the phrases usually frame up with a 1 and 5 chord. This is a D, F sharp, D, and a C. That's part of D, F sharp, A, C. This is missing. It's like your appendix. Nice to have. You don't have to have it to function. I'm pretty confident we're in the key of G major, so we put an uppercase G right there. And D, F sharp, D, A, or sorry, C. That's my 7th. So this is a 5 chord, and because it's in root position, we put the 7 as opposed to a triad. Remember, this is actually 7-5-3, but the shorthand, the 5-3, just become invisible. We don't have to write it. What likes to come after a 5 chord? A 1 chord. Now, it's not that I'm ignoring all this, but usually the left hand, the lower notes, can give you clues more to what's going on. In case of a tie, you almost always go with what the left hand's telling you because it's more foundational to how we hear things. And there's a G and a G and a B and a D. So it is the 1 chord that we were thinking of. No figured bass required because since it's in root position, the 5-3 for figured bass numbers is assumed. It's invisible, it's right there. We just don't write it unless we need to. It's all the same through here, which is reassuring. If we look up top, all they've done is they've just jumped up a note and kept harmonizing. It doesn't matter that there's no D here at the time. We heard the D here, it's implied. The 5th of the chord is kind of like we said, your appendix, right? Your tonsils, something you can do without. And then here it jumps up to a C. Remember that except at cadences and in special situations, we're looking at roots and thirds in the bass. So we'll start with, is this a C? Well, if we're in the key of G, that would be the 4 chord. It's a good chord. So C, G, C. Now there's an F sharp and an E. And because this is forming the C frame right here, that's definitely a non-chord tone. So you see, context helps you know which of these notes to ignore. But if you just looked at it blindly and said, well, I've got a C and I've got a G and I've got an E and an F sharp, right? What do you do with that? Okay, because that could be, an incomplete, like F sharp 9, minor 9 or something like that. It's rare, it's odd, but it's theoretically possible. But you as a person can sort of suss that out. So it's definitely a 4 chord, and that's comforting. And again, root position, so we don't need to worry about figured bass. It's implied, right? And 4 went back to, look, this is the same right there. So there. It's not necessary to write 1s all the way through. You can put a line through if you want, but you don't have to. Okay? And this is mirrored. It's all 1 through the whole thing. Look, this is the same right here, right? So that's a 4. And then here does the same trick, whereas here it jumps up, but it's the same chord. This jumps up, right? Same chord. So all the way through, all the way through. And then here we get our first not root of the chord here in strictest sense, because there's my G, and you might think, oh, it's a G chord, right? But see the C and the E right there? Well, that's still a 4 chord, but now it's in 6-4 position, right? Because the fifth is in the bass, right? C, E, G. And then this goes back to a normal G chord right there. So you could go like 4, 6, 4, and then a 1, which is what it is. But if you're really thinking in figured bass, you'd go, well, this is the same chord that's been going on, so I don't need to write a 4. You could do it though. And then same bass note. See how the note that's a sixth above the G goes down to the 5, and the note that's a fourth above the G goes down there. So this 6 is telling us to go to 5, and that 4 is telling us to go to 3. If you want to, you can write 4, 6, 4 and a 1 in root position, but that's the way that's most efficient using your figured bass. Okay? Now, if you're going, how do I do that on my own? Don't worry about it. Just do this. But I want you to be aware that the figured bass the numbers aren't existing in a vacuum on their themselves. They do actually denote what do you play above the bass notes, right? And then what do you play next above the bass notes? Original figured bass didn't have any chord symbols with them. They just had numbers if you needed them, and told you where to play above, kind of like early lead sheet symbols, right? Okay. All right. Later we used this to help us understand theory stuff and started using it for analysis where we put chords and things on. Okay, let's go on. Second line. Well, here's tip number 1. If it sounds the same, it could be very similar. Sometimes composers will revoice them with different chords, and so you have to look out for variants there. We saw that in some earlier Christmas carols. Sometimes they just revoice the voicings of how it's arranged. Both are there to give us sort of a delightful and growth mindset from the first time we heard it to the next time we heard it. But this is exactly the same. So this is going to go quickly. And see here, it's exactly the same. So this is a 1. This is different right here, right? Stuck to there. It's different right here. But if we still look, it's G, B, D, G. It's totally a G chord. But for purposes of variation and growth, the composer has put it in inversion. So I don't need to put a 1 again because it's the same chord, but I'm going to put a 6, which is shorthand for 6-3, right? But the 3's dropped out. But here, since it goes back to root position, now I'm going to put that back in. It's possible, actually, I just need to put the 5, but I'm going to just put 5-3, so it's clever. I mean, you get it. And here's my 4 chord right here, which is kind of like what happened. Same voicing right there, same voicing right there. It is moving over a little bit because we're changing to a different kind of ending. So the beginning of the phrase is the same, second half is different, and we're seeing changes because of that. So 4 chord, right? Now here's a completely different chord now. You have the A and the C and an E, and that would be an A minor chord, which is 2, okay? And second year, you'd understand that in some ways this is acting as a pivot chord, but or a predominant to a secondary dominant, but that's okay. We won't worry about that right now. 2, 2. Now, here we have a note that is not in the key. And as a first year student, I'd ignore that right now. We'll talk about that in a minute, okay? But we're just gonna ignore it. We don't have to fight it. Right, but we have an A, C, A, and E, and that's still a 2, right? But now the C's in the bass, so we use 6 right there, okay? And then 2 likes to go to 5, right? Which would be our D chord, but we start with a G chord here, but it's in second inversion. The 5th is in the bass, it's 6-4. This is a, my lights have turned off. I'm gonna turn on some more lights, hold on. Okay. So it is a 1 chord, right? But it's in second inversion. The 5th is in the bass, and the figured bass is 6-4. And we know as we come to a cadence or an end of a line or a phrase that this is often an idiom that we see. And so we expect it to go to a 5 chord, which it does. D, A, F sharp, right? C. This is again, it's a suspension holding over. This is a lower neighbor tone. It's not part of the chord. You can see it's framed up as a D chord right there, right? For the 7th, D, A. There's no F sharp in the stack, but there it is right there, and there it is right there. So this is a 5-7. And remember that when we see the 1-6-4 coming to a 5-7 at a cadence, we bracket it. It's not a lot of room here. And we put a 5 underneath it to tell us that this whole thing is actually a 5 chord. It's just the 5 chord is ornamented with these notes right there. Okay? So 2 actually does go to 5. It's just that this is a fancy 5 that's got an entourage of a 1-6-4 ahead of it. This is called the cadential tonic 6-4. We learn about it next term. Okay, but we're getting used to this right now. And then 5 likes to go to 1, G, G, B, G, D. It's all 1 chord right there, right? And again, we start with cadences next term, which is how phrases end. But you see how this one, goes 5-1 and then raises up. It's definitely like what we call an authentic cadence. It's getting us ready just before the little chorus thing at the end. Before we move on, I just want to talk about this guy right here. If we just approach it for what it is, it's a G sharp, a B, and a D, right? So I'm just going to put it down here on the side, make room there's space. G sharp, B, and a D. And that's a G sharp diminished chord, right? Where does that come from? Well, usually when we have an accidental in here, not usually, a good amount of the time, it's making what we call a secondary dominant or secondary diminished chord. Basically, it says, well, the chord that it's going to or that's surrounded by, let's pretend we're in that key for just a little bit right there. It's for flavor and for emphasis. It's really nice. You'll see it everywhere as you get better at recognizing them and calling them. And then we pretend we're in that key and we use modified chords in that key. So this 2 chord right here is A minor, right? And if you think I'm in the key of A minor, G sharp is the leading tone, right? It's from the harmonic minor scale that we use. And G sharp BD would be a 7 chord for this. And we know that 7 diminished chords are substitutes for 5-7 chords, right? And so it makes sense if you think of A minor as a 1 chord, not a 2 chord, right? Then it would have its 7 or 5 right around it. And so this is just pretending for just a second that we're in the key of 2 A minor. It's just transient, so we're not actually gonna write in a different key and change the chord numbers, and it's not like we're gonna change the key signature. It happens all the time briefly. It's cool, but how would we label this? Well, we'd say this chord right here, G sharp BD, is the 7 diminished, and it's in first inversion, so 6, of 2. Let's do that for a brief second, right? That's the second year thing they learn at the beginning of second year. It's good if you see this and go like, we can go around that, we can go back and explore it, okay? All right, the little last bit here, it goes, Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna to his name. Now, we can see, previewing ahead, that there's an accidental and natural canceling that out. What you're gonna find is this is, again, probably making this into some kind of 5 or 7, but probably a 5 of the next chord coming up, right? And this sharp right here doesn't actually change the key signature. It's just reminding you that after the F natural is there, we're back in the key signature. So this is not a cause for alarm. This one here, we're just gonna go around and we expect it to be a 5 or a 7 of the chord coming after it. Just emphasizing it, pretending we're in that key just for a little moment. It gives a little push forward. It's kind of like really good salt and pepper. Put it on it, accentuates the flavor. All right, so here we go. GB, GD. These guys here, we can deal with them if we want, but let's start with this as a 1 chord right there, okay? Now, if you really want to get specific, G, C, G, E is a C, E, G chord, and that would be a 4 chord. And then this would be the 5th of the chord right there. So you could do this and then come back to the 1. And I put that in brackets because it's just a little tiny thing there. We'll learn how to label these next term, okay? But, or if you just went like, I don't even recognize that, just looks like a neighbor tone and a neighbor tone. That's fine too, because it's very brief, okay? Still a 1 chord. Now here, my G, B, G, and D goes G, B, D, F natural. Remember that if I had G, B, D, F sharp, that would be like a major 1 chord with a 7th on it, right? Am I getting this on the page? It looks like it. I'm gonna check my camera. Yes, but it's F natural, which is not part of the key, and we know that a major triad plus the minor seventh is a dominant 7 chord. Dominant 7 chords are usually 5 chords. So this here has been changed into a 5 chord by this change to the key signature. G is 5 of what? 5 of C. And look, here's my C chord right there. So that's my 4 chord coming up, which is fine. How do we label this? We don't label it as 1 dominant 7. We label it as the 5 of that. So 5, 7 of 4. Again, second year technology. If you get it as a concept, great, but you don't have to worry about that. Truly on the final or any big exam, I'm going to give you that answer, or I'm going to use a piece of music that doesn't have that, okay, because it's not part of your curriculum. 4, well, we're coming to the end. D, right? C, F sharp, and A. D, F sharp, A, C. This is my 5 chord. It's got a 7th on it. This is a repeat right there. And then here, usually 5 likes to go to 1. We expect a G chord, G, and there's a B. But look, there's a bunch of E's. It's not a 1 chord. You know, I always say 5 usually likes to go to 1. Well, sometimes that means it can go somewhere else. And the most common place it will go besides 1, rarely, but it does, is 6. It's called a deceptive progression because it makes you think you're going to 1 with the 5 chord. It's got a leading tone going T, Do, but when you get there, it's different. So this is an E minor chord, E, G, B, right? Which is in the key of G is 6. Now I'm just going to pause for a minute. If you're always going like, how does he know that's a 6? Well, I know my scale and well enough that I can jump around to the different scale degrees. And so after you've learned to spell your scales and describe them, that's good, but then we need to be able to access and jump in using your interval theory to count, right? Okay, so either when I went G and I go, what's E? I went down, F sharp, E, or I just went GBD, root third fifth, and so E is 6, or I just know that E is the 6th degree or scale because I know my intervals, right? I also know that it's not E flat or E sharp because this is a 1 sharp, F sharp key signature. So that's just showing that when you have your scale knowledge sort of buttoned down for the tests and things, the next step is to learn how to access that information quickly so you can use it for different things, right? Okay. C, E, and a B and an A. Well, it's tough now. Like, what are we looking at here? And I think here's a situation where a little experience can help. Like, is it a C, E, B note? Is this like a 7th chord, right? A C7 chord, C major 7 chord? It could be, right? But there's some inconsistencies with that. Like, I think this D is just definitely not part of it. If I go to play this, you're going to hear the C and the D, and this is just, the D is going to sound dissonant. Then it resolves to the C, and that sounds great as an octave, right? So you're going like, it is a C chord. Well, no, because if this was a non-chord tone resolving to a chord tone, then this dissonant note here also feels like a non-chord tone resolving to a chord tone, right? There's a consistency there. So that means that this is probably not part of the chord. This is probably not part of the chord. So our chord is got a C, an E, a C, and an A, or an A, C, E, which is my 2 chord. And it's in first inversion because the C's in the bass, okay? And just further on top of that, we love chord progressions that go down by a 5th. 5-1 is the strongest cadence you can get, right? And 6 going down to 2 is actually a 5th down, right? E goes down to A. I know that's not an A right there, but it's an A chord, right? So this is definitely a stronger and expected chord progression. And then 2 likes to go to 5. Let's see if that's confirmed here. Well, there's my 5, D, F sharp, C. There's no A, but it's that thing. There's my 5-7, and here's my 1-6-4, G, B, and then D's, right? With the 5th in the bass, 1-6-4, and we put a bracket underneath here, and we call that all 5. So 2 likes to go to 5. So really strong cadence. It goes from 5 to surprise. We got a 6, but then 6 to 5, down by a 5th, down by a 5th, down by a 5th to my 1 chord. It's as strong as you can get. Okay. Now I know in this analysis we haven't gone over cadences. We haven't gone over like what to call them. We haven't really labeled, like this is what we call a pedal 6/4, And we haven't gone in and actually labeled all the non-chord tones for what they are. That's stuff that we fill in as you get more and more curriculum. And this basic structure, though, where you get the chord and the chord number, the key, right? And you look at what's foundational to it and figure out what the chords are and put in your figure bass. That's sort of the bed under which we build that, so then we can look at other things. There's other levels of analysis where you look at like motivic use, and are the phrases the same? Are they different? Do the cadences make certain patterns, right? And are the phrases the same lengths? Are the repeats? All those kind of things. What key areas did we go to? So there's next level analysis, but this is the core right there. And so let's just go through this one more time. You should be able to recognize your key signature and confirm it with sound, and then the chords at the beginnings and ends of the phrases. And you should be thinking, is it a major key or is it a minor key? Or is it not even the key signature, because there's other accidentals. Sometimes you'll get an excerpt in the middle of a piece where it says it's got one sharp, but you look all the way through and there's a C sharp as well, always written in as an accidental, and in that place it's two sharps. So you're not in the key of G, you're in the key of D or B minor. So you got to be able to figure that out quickly. Got to be able to read your notes, right? Because you got to be able to get that information off the page quickly. You got to be able to spell your chords so you can tell what it is and know their chord qualities. And it really helps if you can, English, hold on, Awaseru, Japanese. If you can kind of like coordinate or reference and, the key with the number, because 1 chords and 5 chords and then a few other chords are generally the thing we see most. And there's certain patterns that go like, 5, 6, 2, 5, 1, or 6, 2, 5, 1. They're standard sort of gambits, right? Then do you know your figured bass? Okay. If you struggle with analysis, generally it's not because you're terrible at anything. It's one of these areas, one or more, you haven't really buttoned down and gotten really great at yet. And so, go back and figure that out. If you struggle with bass clef as a first-year student because you've never played it, spend some time there. If you're not sure about how to spell chords, spend some time there. We have a worksheet that we just gave out recently that's going to take you through all the scales again. And you know that on your final you have the time thing that's like, spell these scales, add the accidentals, and it's timed 15 seconds per just slideshow. And then spell some 7th chords, right? 10 seconds per, and then identify all these notes, 5 seconds per. This is sort of just minimum core skills that allow you to be happy to do that. Once all your fundamentals are strong and in place, you don't fear theory. It's fun. It's amazing to discover what people have done and all the structure and stuff that's in there that makes all the artistry that we love come out. So, okay, cool. Hope this was useful. I'll see you in class.